For thousands of years, the sands of Egypt have buried the names of kings who once believed they would live forever. Their monuments were built to defy time. Their tombs were filled with gold, sacred texts, food, weapons, jewelry, and everything a ruler might need for eternity. But sometimes history has a crueler plan. A king can disappear completely. His statues can crumble. His name can vanish from the walls. His tomb can be swallowed by the desert, leaving behind almost nothing to prove that he ever existed. And then, thousands of years later, archaeologists discover a hidden chamber beneath an ancient landscape. The entrance is sealed. The walls are damaged. The burial chamber is strangely empty. But inside are clues that point toward a forgotten ruler, a name that may have survived where history failed. And perhaps the most disturbing question of all is not simply who this pharaoh was, but why someone wanted him to be forgotten. Because in ancient Egypt, erasing a person's name was not just an insult. It could mean erasing the person from eternity itself. Imagine standing beneath the burning Egyptian sun, surrounded by endless rock and sand. There is no modern city in sight, no sound of traffic, no towering monument announcing that something extraordinary lies beneath your feet. Just an ancient landscape that has remained almost unchanged for thousands of years. Then someone notices something unusual. A line in the rock. A strange opening. A passage descending into darkness. At first, it may look like nothing more than another damaged structure left behind by an ancient civilization. Egypt is full of them. Tombs, shafts, chambers, temples, forgotten foundations, and buried monuments are scattered across the landscape. But archaeology often begins with something that looks insignificant. A small clue. A broken piece of stone. A fragment of pottery. A symbol carved into a wall. And sometimes, those tiny clues lead to something enormous. For generations, archaeologists have searched the deserts and valleys of Egypt for the burial places of forgotten rulers. Some were relatively easy to identify because their monuments survived. Others were much harder. Ancient tombs were frequently robbed, damaged by floods, deliberately emptied or reused centuries later. Royal mummies were sometimes moved from their original tombs and hidden in secret chambers to protect them from thieves. That means finding a mummy does not necessarily mean finding its original tomb. And finding a tomb does not necessarily mean finding its owner. This is what makes a newly uncovered royal burial so fascinating. The tomb may still exist, but the person who ordered it to be built can be almost impossible to identify. Imagine spending your entire lifetime preparing for eternity, ordering workers to carve chambers into solid rock, decorating walls with sacred symbols, gathering precious objects, and ensuring that your name is repeated again and again. Then imagine that thousands of years later, someone enters the tomb and cannot even tell who you were. For the ancient Egyptians, that would have been terrifying. The Egyptians believed that a person's name, their Ren, was deeply connected to their existence. As long as the name continued to be spoken or written, the individual could continue to exist in the afterlife. That is why royal names appeared everywhere. On statues, on temples, on jewelry, on monuments, inside tombs. A pharaoh's name was supposed to survive forever. So when a name disappears, the mystery becomes much bigger than archaeology. It becomes a question of identity. Who was this person? Why was their memory lost? Was it simply the result of time? Was the tomb robbed and abandoned? Was the ruler politically insignificant? Or did someone deliberately try to remove this king from history? Ancient Egypt was not always the stable civilization we imagine when we look at the pyramids. There were periods of political chaos, rival kingdoms, foreign rulers, civil wars, religious transformations, and struggles over the throne. During these periods, some rulers left behind enormous monuments. Others left almost nothing. Some names survived only on broken pieces of stone. Others were preserved in later historical records. And some seem to have disappeared almost completely. This is why discoveries in places like Abydos can be so important. Abydos was not simply another cemetery. To the ancient Egyptians, it was sacred ground. It was believed to be closely connected with Osiris, the god of the dead and the ruler of the underworld. According to Egyptian mythology, Osiris was murdered, his body was separated into pieces, and he was eventually restored to life. The story became a powerful symbol of death and resurrection. And because Osiris was believed to have been associated with Abydos, the location became one of the most important religious centers in Egypt. Pharaohs wanted their presence connected to this sacred landscape. Pilgrims traveled there. Temples were built. Offerings were made. And royal burials appeared across the region. Even thousands of years later, the ground around Abydos continues to produce surprises. Archaeologists have discovered royal tombs belonging to rulers who were once almost completely unknown. In some cases, these discoveries changed what historians believed about entire periods of Egyptian history. One of the most fascinating examples comes from the mysterious group of rulers sometimes associated with the Abydos dynasty. For a long time, their existence was uncertain. They were not the famous pyramid builders. They did not leave behind monuments that dominate the modern imagination. Instead, archaeologists had to reconstruct their history from fragments. Broken blocks, inscribed stones, damaged tombs, scattered evidence. And then came discoveries that provided something far more powerful than speculation: proof. A royal tomb could transform a forgotten name into a historical figure. A single inscription could change an entire timeline. And a human body could reveal how that ruler lived, fought, suffered, and died. But there is another problem. Even when archaeologists discover a royal tomb, the tomb may not contain the body. Floods could destroy burial chambers. Water could enter through cracks in the rock. Ceilings could collapse. Grave robbers could remove valuable objects. And ancient priests sometimes moved royal mummies to secret locations long after the original burial. That is exactly why some Egyptian mummies were discovered centuries later in hidden collections of royal remains, rather than inside their original tombs. The story of Thutmose II is a perfect example of this mystery. For years, researchers did not know exactly where his original tomb was. His mummy had already been discovered in the 19th century, but it was not lying peacefully inside the tomb where he had originally been buried. Instead, it had been moved and hidden with other royal mummies. Then, more than a century later, archaeologists found a previously unidentified tomb in the Theban mountains near Luxor. At first, they believed it belonged to a queen. The location seemed to support that idea. The tomb was near the burials of royal women connected to Thutmose III, and its design initially appeared consistent with a female royal burial. But archaeology has a habit of changing the story. Inside the tomb, researchers found alabaster vessels bearing the name of Thutmose II. Suddenly, the mysterious tomb had an owner. A pharaoh who had been missing from the archaeological landscape for generations finally had a burial place. But the discovery created another mystery. The tomb was damaged by ancient flooding. The burial chamber had been affected so severely that much of what had originally been placed inside was gone. The body and burial equipment had apparently been moved. And that raised an important question. If ancient Egyptians went to such extraordinary lengths to protect their kings, where had the missing objects been taken? Where was the rest of the burial? And how many other royal tombs might still be hidden beneath the desert? Because if one forgotten pharaoh can disappear for thousands of years and then suddenly reappear through a handful of clues, there may be many more waiting. Somewhere beneath the rocks, sand, and ancient ruins could be another entrance, another corridor, another sealed chamber, another name, and perhaps another ruler whose entire existence has been waiting for someone to find it. The discovery of a lost pharaoh's tomb is therefore not simply the discovery of an ancient room. It is the recovery of a forgotten identity. And as archaeologists continue digging deeper into Egypt's buried past, one question becomes impossible to ignore. How many pharaohs are still missing? And if one of them has already been found after thousands of years, what will happen when the next forgotten king finally opens his door? If a tomb can survive for thousands of years, then why does its owner sometimes disappear? That question becomes even more disturbing when you realize that ancient Egyptians spent enormous amounts of time, money, and effort trying to make sure exactly the opposite would happen. A pharaoh was not supposed to be forgotten. His name was supposed to be carved into stone, repeated in prayers, carried through temples, and preserved alongside his body for eternity. His tomb was supposed to become a permanent home. His treasures were supposed to accompany him into the next world. His identity was supposed to outlive every generation that came after him. And yet somehow, it didn't always work. Across Egypt, archaeologists have discovered royal burials where the walls survived but the names disappeared. Tombs where the sarcophagus remained but the mummy was gone. Chambers where expensive objects had once been placed, yet only fragments remained. And sometimes, the strangest discovery of all is a royal tomb that appears to have been deliberately emptied not long after the ruler died. That is where the story of Egypt's forgotten pharaohs becomes more than a story about archaeology. It becomes a story about fear. Fear of thieves. Fear of political enemies. Fear of floods. And perhaps, in some cases, fear of being erased from history. To understand why ancient Egyptian tombs became so complicated, we need to understand what the Egyptians thought happened after death. For them, death was not necessarily the end. It was a transition. The body might stop breathing, but several spiritual aspects of a person were believed to continue existing. The dead needed their identity, their body, their possessions, and the proper rituals to survive in the next world. That is why a tomb was not simply a grave. It was a carefully prepared afterlife environment. A dead ruler might be surrounded by food, clothing, jewelry, weapons, furniture, cosmetics, perfumes, religious objects, and sacred texts. Everything had a purpose. Food could provide nourishment. Clothing could provide protection and status. Jewelry could display wealth and power. Sacred texts could guide the dead through dangerous regions of the underworld. Even the person's name was essential. The ancient Egyptians understood something about memory that remains true even today. If nobody remembers you, eventually you disappear. But they believed this idea in an even more literal way. The Ren, the name, was connected to the continued existence of the individual. So writing a king's name was not decoration, it was protection. Destroying it could be an attack on the king himself. This is one reason the walls of royal monuments can be so revealing. When archaeologists find a damaged cartouche, they are not simply looking at vandalism. They may be looking at evidence of a political struggle. A successor may have wanted to remove a previous ruler. A dynasty may have wanted to distance itself from an unpopular period. A religious revolution may have turned old beliefs into something dangerous. Or later generations may simply have neglected a forgotten king. History is rarely clean. Egypt's royal succession was not always a simple father-to-son line. Power could move between branches of a family. Queens could become regents. Military commanders could become kings. Young heirs could be controlled by powerful relatives. And sometimes, a ruler's political importance was determined less by what happened during their lifetime and more by what later rulers wanted people to remember. Few stories demonstrate this better than the relationship between Thutmose II Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. Thutmose II ruled for only a relatively short period. He was not remembered in the same way as some of the great warrior kings who came before or after him. But his marriage changed Egyptian history. He married his half-sister Hatshepsut, a royal woman who would eventually become one of the most powerful female rulers in ancient Egypt. When Thutmose II died, his successor was Thutmose III. But Thutmose III was still young. Hatshepsut became the dominant political figure. Eventually, she took on the full royal identity of a pharaoh. She commissioned enormous monuments. She organized major building projects. She expanded trade. She sent an expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, bringing back valuable goods such as incense, ebony, and other exotic products. Her temple at Deir el-Bahari became one of the most recognizable monuments in Egypt. And yet, after her death, something strange happened. Her memory was attacked. Her name and images were removed from monuments in a deliberate campaign that appears to have been connected to the politics of succession. For centuries, this helped create a distorted picture of her place in Egyptian history. Imagine that. A ruler can build monuments intended to last forever, only for another generation to try to erase her from them. But the story did not end there. Her monuments survived. Her name survived in fragments. And eventually, archaeology reconstructed the truth. This is why the discovery of a forgotten pharaoh's tomb can be so important. The tomb is not just a burial structure. It is a message from the past. Every architectural decision can tell us something. The size of the corridor, the shape of the burial chamber, the position of the entrance, the decoration on the walls, the religious texts, the objects left behind. Even the damage can become evidence. If a tomb was flooded, the debris can reveal how water entered. If it was robbed, the pattern of destruction can reveal what thieves were searching for. If the mummy was moved, later records or inscriptions may help archaeologists reconstruct where it went. And if the tomb was deliberately emptied, that can tell us something about the dangers facing the royal dead. Ancient Egyptians knew that tombs were targets. Royal burials contained wealth, gold, precious stones, perfumes, fine textiles, weapons, ceremonial objects. And the greater the ruler, the greater the temptation. Grave robbing became such a serious problem that officials eventually developed secret strategies for protecting royal mummies. Some bodies were removed from their original tombs. They were wrapped again. Their identities were sometimes recorded on the linen. Then they were hidden in secret locations. Centuries later, archaeologists could discover a collection of royal mummies together, creating one of the strangest scenes imaginable. Kings who had once ruled enormous territories were suddenly lying together in a hidden chamber, stripped of the grand tombs they had built for eternity. It is almost as if history had gathered them into one final hiding place. And that is what makes mummy science so fascinating. A mummy can reveal things that inscriptions cannot. The bones can show injuries. The teeth can reveal diet. The joints can reveal physical stress. The body can reveal disease. Modern CT scanning can sometimes expose details without opening the remains. DNA can reveal family relationships. Suddenly, a person who died thousands of years ago becomes more than a name carved into stone. They become human. They had injuries. They had illnesses. They aged. They ate. They walked. They fought. They suffered. And eventually, they died. King Tutankhamun remains the most famous example. He died young, probably around 19 years old. His tomb was discovered in 1922, remarkably rich in surviving burial equipment. His mummy and DNA studies helped researchers reconstruct aspects of his family and health. He was not the invincible god king imagined by popular culture. He was a young man with serious health problems who lived during a complicated period of Egyptian history. And that discovery changed how the world viewed ancient Egypt. The same could happen again. A previously unknown mummy could reveal a family connection that changes a dynasty's history. A damaged inscription could identify a ruler whose name was thought to be lost. A burial chamber could contain evidence that forces historians to rethink who controlled a region. And somewhere in Egypt, that evidence may still be waiting. But there is one clue archaeologists fear more than almost anything else: a missing name. Because when the name of a pharaoh disappears, it creates a mystery that thousands of years cannot easily solve. Was the name destroyed? Was it never completed? Was the ruler too insignificant to be remembered? Or was someone deliberately trying to make sure future generations would never know that this king existed? The desert does not answer questions. It only preserves them. A wall can collapse. A tomb can flood. A mummy can be moved. A cartouche can be damaged. But fragments remain. And sometimes those fragments are enough to bring a forgotten ruler back from the darkness. The real mystery is what happens when those fragments begin to connect. Because the tomb may tell us who was buried there. The inscriptions may tell us when he lived. The mummy may tell us how he died. But the surrounding evidence may reveal something much bigger. It may tell us why the ancient Egyptians wanted this particular ruler to be remembered, or why someone later wanted him erased. And if that answer is hidden somewhere beneath the sands, archaeologists may already be standing closer to it than anyone realizes. The deeper archaeologists go into Egypt's buried past, the stranger the story becomes. Because sometimes the greatest discovery is not a golden statue, a jewel-covered coffin, or a perfectly preserved mummy. Sometimes it is something much smaller. A few painted symbols, a broken vessel, a fragment of a royal name, a piece of plaster that should have been destroyed thousands of years ago, but somehow survived. And when those fragments begin to fit together, they can reveal the existence of someone history almost completely forgot. That is the strange power of an ancient tomb. It can remain silent for thousands of years and then suddenly begin speaking. But there is a problem. Ancient Egypt did not leave us a complete record of its kings. We often imagine the pharaohs as if every ruler was carefully documented, every reign recorded, and every royal burial identified. In reality, the picture is much messier. Names were damaged. Monuments were reused. Tombs were robbed. Mummies were moved. Entire periods of political instability left behind surprisingly little evidence. And one of the most mysterious periods of all was the Second Intermediate Period. This was not the Egypt of the Great Pyramid builders. There was no single, uncontested ruler controlling the entire country. Instead, Egypt was divided between competing powers. Different rulers controlled different regions. Foreign groups held territory in the north. Local dynasties fought for influence in the south. And in the middle of this political chaos was Abydos, one of the most sacred places in Egypt. Today, Abydos may look like another archaeological site surrounded by desert. But to ancient Egyptians, this place was different. It was connected to Osiris. And Osiris was not just another god. He represented death, resurrection, kingship, and the promise that death could be followed by another form of existence. According to the mythology, Osiris was murdered by his brother Set. His body was divided and scattered. His wife Isis searched for the pieces and eventually restored him. Osiris returned in another form, becoming ruler of the underworld. For the ancient Egyptians, this story carried enormous meaning. The death of Osiris was not simply a tragedy. It was a model for what could happen to every person who died. The body could be preserved. The soul could continue. And the dead could enter another world. This connection made Abydos incredibly important. Pharaohs wanted to associate themselves with Osiris. Temples were built. Offerings were made. Pilgrims traveled long distances. Royal monuments appeared across the landscape. And eventually, one of Egypt's strangest royal mysteries began to emerge. Archaeologists discovered evidence of a group of rulers who had been almost completely forgotten: the Abydos dynasty. For a long time, historians were not even certain these kings had existed. There were no gigantic monuments announcing their names, No enormous pyramid complexes, no famous statues dominating the landscape. Instead, there were fragments, broken stones, scattered inscriptions, and tombs that were difficult to interpret. It was almost as if these rulers had lived in the shadows of history. Then came a discovery that changed everything. A royal tomb belonging to a ruler known as Senebkai provided powerful evidence that this mysterious dynasty was real. The tomb itself was not enormous. It was not filled with unimaginable treasure, but what mattered most was the person inside. The remains revealed evidence of multiple serious injuries. His skull had been damaged. His body showed wounds. His hands had suffered trauma. The evidence suggested that he may have died violently, possibly in combat. Suddenly, the mysterious king became more than a name. He became a human being who may have fought and died during one of Egypt's most unstable periods. And his tomb became a historical time capsule. Because sometimes, a modest tomb can be more valuable than a spectacular one. Gold tells us that someone was wealthy. A weapon can tell us someone was a warrior. But the structure of a tomb can tell us how a society understood death. The inscriptions can tell us what they believed. And the body can sometimes tell us what happened to the person themselves. This is why another royal tomb discovered in the Abydos region could be so significant. The newly uncovered burial was large. Its architecture included massive mud brick vaults and limestone elements. Its location was deeply connected to the sacred landscape, and its entrance contained imagery associated with powerful protective deities. Among them were Isis and Nephthys. These were not random decorations. They were guardians, protectors of the dead. Their presence suggested that the person buried inside was not ordinary. This was someone who belonged to the world of kings. But then came the most frustrating discovery of all. The royal name was missing. Imagine finding a giant ancient tomb and realizing that the most important piece of information is gone. Who built it? Who was buried here? Why did they have the resources to construct such a monument? And why is their name unreadable? For archaeologists, this is where the investigation becomes almost like detective work. They cannot simply look at one inscription and announce the answer. They have to build a case. Architecture becomes evidence. The location becomes evidence. The style of the decoration becomes evidence. The religious symbols become evidence. The date of the materials becomes evidence. Even the position of the tomb in relation to other royal burials can become evidence. It is a giant historical puzzle, and every piece matters. One of the most important pieces is the cartouche. The cartouche was an oval-shaped enclosure used to distinguish the names of kings and queens. It was one of the most recognizable symbols of Egyptian royalty. If you saw a royal cartouche carved into a wall, you were essentially looking at an ancient signature. The king was saying, "I was here. I ruled. Remember me." But in the mysterious Abydos tomb, that signature had become unreadable. Time had done its damage. The name that once identified the ruler had become a blank space in the historical record. And that creates a haunting possibility. Maybe this king was never meant to be forgotten. Maybe his name was simply destroyed by nature. Or perhaps the erasure was deliberate. Egyptian history contains examples of rulers whose names and images were removed from monuments. Political enemies could attack the memory of their predecessors. A ruler could become dangerous even after death if their legacy threatened the legitimacy of a new dynasty. In ancient Egypt, destroying someone's name could be an attack on their eternity. So when archaeologists find a damaged royal name, they have to ask a difficult question. Is this ordinary destruction? Or is it evidence of something intentional? The answer may be hidden in details that seem insignificant. The thickness of a wall, the position of a damaged inscription, the way a statue was broken, the order in which a monument was reused. Even the dirt surrounding an object can sometimes preserve clues. And modern technology is making these investigations more powerful than ever. Archaeologists can scan underground areas without immediately digging them apart. They can use remote sensing to search for hidden structures. They can create digital models of tombs. They can examine human remains with CT scanners. They can analyze tiny traces of material that would have been impossible to study decades ago. In some cases, they can extract DNA. Suddenly, a tomb that looks empty can contain an enormous amount of information. But there is another mystery. If the tomb was robbed, what was taken? And if the body was removed, where did it go? Ancient Egyptian officials knew that royal tombs attracted thieves. A pharaoh's burial could contain generations of wealth. So when tomb robbing became a serious threat, priests sometimes moved royal bodies into hidden locations. The original tomb became an empty shell. The mummy continued its journey. This explains why archaeologists sometimes discover royal mummies far away from their original burial places. It also means that finding a tomb without a mummy does not necessarily mean the burial failed. It may mean that someone successfully rescued it. And that changes the way we should look at an empty royal chamber. An empty room is not necessarily evidence of defeat. It might be evidence of survival. The ancient Egyptians may have removed the body because they believed the tomb itself was no longer safe. They were trying to protect the king from being destroyed by thieves. Thousands of years later, archaeologists are now trying to reverse that journey. They are connecting tombs to mummies, mummies to families, families to dynasties, and dynasties to forgotten political events. Every discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. And somewhere in that puzzle may be the identity of the nameless king. Perhaps another inscription is waiting nearby. Perhaps another tomb has already been found but not fully understood. Perhaps the missing royal name survived on an object that was removed from the burial thousands of years ago. Or perhaps the answer is still buried beneath the ground. That is what makes archaeology so addictive. The mystery is never completely dead. A broken wall can become a clue. A missing mummy can become a question. A forgotten name can become a historical revolution. And when the desert finally gives up one more fragment, it may reveal that the pharaoh we thought was lost forever was never truly gone. He was simply waiting for someone to remember his name. For ancient Egyptians, a tomb was never supposed to be empty. Every object had a purpose. Every symbol carried meaning. Every painted figure was part of a carefully constructed journey into the next world. A royal burial was designed as a final fortress, a place where the body of a king could remain protected while his spirit continued beyond death. So when archaeologists enter a royal tomb and find almost nothing, the emptiness can be more mysterious than treasure. Because an empty chamber asks a terrifying question: what happened here? Was the tomb robbed? Was the pharaoh moved? Was the burial interrupted? Or did someone deliberately remove everything connected to the ruler? These questions become especially important when investigating the tombs of forgotten Egyptian kings. The discovery of a royal burial does not automatically solve a mystery. Sometimes it creates an even bigger one. Imagine entering a chamber that has been sealed for thousands of years. The air is still. Dust covers the floor. The walls are damaged. The ceiling shows signs of collapse. You expect to see a sarcophagus, offerings, fragments of furniture, perhaps the remains of a burial. Instead, there is nothing. No mummy, no golden mask, no royal jewelry, no obvious sign of the king, only an empty room and a few clues. To an untrained eye, it might look like a failed excavation. To an archaeologist, it could be the beginning of the real investigation. Ancient tombs were vulnerable places. Water could enter through cracks in the rock. Floods could carry mud and debris into corridors. Ceilings could collapse. Earthquakes could damage structures. And then there were the thieves. Grave robbers knew exactly what they were looking for. They understood that royal tombs contained valuable objects. Gold could be melted down. Jewelry could be dismantled. Precious stones could be reused. Perfumes could be taken. Weapons could be sold or repurposed. Even pieces of furniture could disappear. For the thieves, the tomb was a treasure chest. For the Egyptians, it was a sacred home. This conflict between religion and greed shaped the history of Egyptian burial. The more elaborate the tomb became, the more attractive it became to criminals. Eventually, authorities realized that simply building a magnificent tomb was not enough. They needed another solution. Hide the dead. Move the mummies. Protect them somewhere nobody would expect. This is one reason the story of Egyptian royal mummies is so strange. Some rulers were buried with incredible ceremonies, only for their bodies to be removed generations later. Priests sometimes opened old royal tombs and transferred the remains to safer locations. They wrapped the mummies again. They repaired damaged coffins. They added new labels. And they placed multiple rulers together in secret hiding places. It sounds almost like a rescue operation. And in a way, that is exactly what it was. The priests were trying to save the dead from a second death. Because to the ancient Egyptians, destroying the body was not simply physical destruction. It threatened the person's ability to exist in the afterlife. This is why mummification became so important. The body had to remain recognizable. The face had to be preserved. The limbs had to remain together. The body was dried using natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture that removed moisture and made the environment hostile to bacteria. Then the body was treated with oils and resins. It was wrapped in linen. Amulets were placed among the bandages. And religious rituals were performed to prepare the deceased for eternity. The process could take around 70 days. 70 days. That is a remarkable amount of time to prepare one body for the next world. But the process was only part of the journey. The tomb itself was equally important. The Egyptians imagined the afterlife as a dangerous journey filled with obstacles. The dead needed guidance. That is why tomb walls were covered with sacred texts and scenes. One important collection of funerary writings was known as the Book of the Dead. Other texts, including the Amduat, described the journey through the underworld. These weren't simply stories. They were instructions. They were spiritual maps. They were supposed to help the dead navigate the mysterious world beyond death. The tomb, therefore, became a kind of machine for eternity. Every element had a role. The walls, the paintings, the objects, the offerings, the mummy, the name. Remove one piece and the system could be threatened. This is why the discovery of fragments from funerary texts inside a damaged royal tomb can be so important. Even if the original objects are gone, the remaining decoration can reveal what kind of burial once existed there. A fragment of blue inscription, a yellow star painted on plaster, a damaged religious scene, a partial name. To us, these may look like pieces of decoration. To archaeologists, they are evidence. And sometimes evidence can survive even when the treasure does not. Consider the case of Thutmose II. His tomb, recently identified in the Theban mountains near Luxor, had suffered from ancient flooding. The entrance and corridor had been blocked by debris. The burial chamber had been damaged, and the contents were largely gone. But the absence of objects did not mean the tomb was unimportant. Quite the opposite. The architecture itself helped tell the story. A long descending corridor, a staircase, a burial chamber, a design that showed the evolution of royal tomb construction during the 18th dynasty. And then came the evidence that transformed the excavation. Alabaster vessels carrying the name of Thutmose II. The identity of the tomb was no longer just a theory. It had an owner. But the mystery of what happened after his death remained. Why had the tomb been emptied? Where had his burial equipment gone? And where exactly was his body moved? The mummy of Thutmose II had already been discovered long before the tomb was identified. It was found in a hidden cache of royal mummies at Deir el-Bahari. That means archaeologists were dealing with an extraordinary situation. They had the mummy. They now had the original tomb. But the tomb and mummy had been separated for thousands of years. Imagine the story hidden inside that journey. A king dies. His body is prepared. His burial takes place. The tomb is damaged by water. Something happens. The burial is disturbed. The mummy is eventually moved. Centuries pass. The original tomb disappears from memory. The mummy survives in another location. Then, thousands of years later, archaeologists rediscover both pieces of the story. It is almost like finding a missing person in their abandoned house after centuries of searching. And Thutmose II was not the only ruler whose burial history became complicated. Ramses II suffered a similar fate. He was one of Egypt's longest reigning and most powerful pharaohs. He ruled for decades. He launched military campaigns. He commissioned enormous monuments. His statues were gigantic. His name was repeated across Egypt. He was the kind of ruler who seemed impossible to forget. And yet, even his mummy eventually had to be moved for protection. When his remains were discovered in the 19th century among other royal mummies, they were no longer inside his original tomb. The mummy had become part of a secret collection. The great king had been reduced to a wrapped body hidden away from the world. Then, in modern times, something even stranger happened. When Ramses II needed to travel to France for scientific examination, he was issued a passport. Yes, a passport. His occupation was listed as king. Even after more than 3,000 years, the ancient ruler still needed paperwork to cross an international border. It is an amusing story, but it also reveals something profound. The identity of Ramses II had survived. His name survived. His monuments survived. His mummy survived. His story survived. But not every pharaoh was so fortunate. Some rulers left behind enormous monuments but disappeared from historical memory. Others left only fragments. And some may still be waiting for archaeologists to connect their tomb with their name. That is what makes the nameless royal burial at Abydos so intriguing. The tomb is there. The royal architecture is there. The protective gods are there. The evidence of importance is there. But the identity remains uncertain. And that missing name could be the key to an entire forgotten chapter of Egyptian history. Perhaps the ruler belonged to the mysterious Abydos dynasty. Perhaps he ruled during a period of political division. Perhaps he was more powerful than historians currently realize. Or perhaps the missing name will reveal something completely unexpected. Because every royal tomb is a message. And this one may be saying something history has not yet learned how to hear. The treasure may be gone. The mummy may be missing. The name may be damaged. But the tomb itself remains. And sometimes an empty tomb is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. There is something unsettling about finding a royal tomb and realizing that the most important person connected to it is missing. The walls are there. The corridors are there. The symbols are there. But the king is gone. For an archaeologist, this is not simply an empty burial chamber. It is a crime scene that has been frozen in time. Every broken object, every layer of sediment, every mark on the stone can potentially reveal what happened thousands of years ago. And sometimes the most important clue is not what survived. It is what did not. The missing mummy. The missing treasure. The missing name. The missing story. Ancient Egypt was obsessed with preserving identity. A person's body could be transformed through mummification, but the Egyptians also believed that the name had to survive. That was why kings covered monuments with their royal names. Their cartouches appeared on temples, statues, vessels, jewelry, and tomb walls. The name was a declaration of existence. I was here. I ruled. Remember me. But imagine discovering a royal burial where that declaration has disappeared. It raises the possibility that the tomb belonged to someone history intentionally forgot. And ancient Egypt provides several examples showing that this was possible. One of the most famous is Hatshepsut. Today, she is remembered as one of Egypt's most successful rulers. But she was not supposed to become the kind of pharaoh we know today. Hatshepsut began her royal life as the wife of Thutmose II. When her husband died, the throne passed to Thutmose III, who was still young. Hatshepsut initially acted as regent, but over time, she adopted the full identity and authority of a pharaoh. She wore the symbols of kingship. She commissioned monuments. She presented herself in royal imagery. And she ruled Egypt for years. Her reign brought major construction projects and international trade. One of her most famous achievements was the expedition to Punt. The exact location of Punt remains uncertain, but Egyptian records describe a wealthy land associated with valuable goods. The expedition returned with incense, exotic plants, ebony, gold, and other materials. Hatshepsut also transformed the landscape around Thebes. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari rose dramatically against the cliffs. At Karnak, she commissioned enormous monuments, including obelisks. She was determined to leave a permanent record of her reign. And she succeeded. But after her death, the story changed. Her images were damaged. Her name was removed from some monuments. Her presence was reduced. For a long time, historians had difficulty understanding what had happened. Why would a ruler who had achieved so much be treated as though she should disappear? Politics is the most likely answer. The problem was not that Hatshepsut had failed. The problem was that her existence complicated the story of the next king. Erasing her helped create a cleaner royal succession. It was not enough to control Egypt. The next rulers also had to control how Egypt remembered its past. And this is where the idea of a lost pharaoh becomes much more disturbing. What if the disappearance of a royal name was not an accident? What if someone wanted it to happen? The evidence from Egypt suggests that memory could be manipulated. A ruler could be glorified. Another could be ignored. A name could be repeated thousands of times. Another could be removed. History was not simply being recorded, it was being constructed. That is why archaeologists are so cautious when they investigate damaged royal monuments. A missing name is not automatically evidence of persecution. Time itself can destroy inscriptions. Sand can erode surfaces. Water can dissolve plaster. Stone can crack. Later builders can reuse ancient blocks. But when patterns appear, the mystery becomes stronger. Repeated damage. Consistent removal. Royal images destroyed while surrounding decoration remains intact. Names carefully erased while other inscriptions survive. These details can reveal deliberate actions. And sometimes those actions were not performed by ancient enemies. They happened centuries later. A tomb could be robbed and then reused. A temple could be converted. A statue could be buried. A royal name could become politically inconvenient long after the king died. This is why the archaeology of Egypt resembles detective work. The investigators are not only looking for objects, they are reconstructing decisions. Who built this? Who altered it? Who destroyed it? Who moved the body? Who buried the evidence? And why? The mysterious royal tomb at Abydos raises exactly these questions. Its location is significant. Its architecture is significant. Its protective imagery is significant. Its scale is significant. But the missing royal identity remains the central problem. A tomb of this size and design was not built for an ordinary official. The person inside had access to enormous resources: Workers had to quarry stone, transport materials, construct walls, create chambers, decorate surfaces, perform religious rituals, prepare the burial. All of this required a functioning political system. So whoever this ruler was, they mattered. The mystery becomes even deeper when the tomb is compared with other royal burials from the same period. Architecture can act like a fingerprint. Egyptian tomb designs changed over time. Different dynasties preferred different layouts. Different regions had different traditions. Certain religious symbols became popular in particular periods. So even without a readable name, archaeologists can sometimes estimate when a tomb was built and identify which royal tradition it belongs to. The tomb becomes its own historical document. And the surrounding landscape adds another layer. Abydos was sacred because of its connection to Osiris. For a king, being buried there could carry enormous religious significance. The ruler was not simply being placed underground. He was being connected to the god of resurrection. That connection mattered because pharaohs were expected to become divine after death. The king's journey did not end at the tomb. It continued into the afterlife. This explains the extraordinary amount of preparation that went into royal burial. Food was placed inside tombs. Wine and other beverages were stored. Clothing was prepared. Jewelry was included. Perfumes and oils were provided. Furniture could be buried with the dead. Weapons could accompany warriors. Games were included. Even fans made from precious materials could be provided. The tomb was designed as a complete world. King Tutankhamun's burial gives us perhaps the clearest surviving example. His tomb contained an astonishing collection of objects. 3 coffins protected his body, including one made from gold. There were chariots, walking sticks, jewelry, clothing, furniture, food, wine, and countless objects that revealed how a young pharaoh was expected to live in eternity. Yet Tutankhamun's tomb was an unusual survivor. Most royal tombs were not so fortunate. Robbers discovered many of them. Objects were stolen. Bodies were disturbed. Tombs were damaged. And in some cases, priests had to intervene. The result is that archaeology often deals with incomplete evidence. We see only what survived. And what survived may be misleading. A tomb with no gold may not have belonged to a poor ruler. The gold may have been stolen. A tomb with no mummy may not have been abandoned. The mummy may have been moved. A tomb without a readable name may not have belonged to an insignificant king. The name may have been deliberately erased. This is why the search for a lost pharaoh cannot stop at the entrance to a tomb. Archaeologists must follow the evidence beyond it. They need to search nearby chambers, study surrounding burials, examine fragments, compare architecture, analyze human remains, search for inscriptions. And sometimes they need to look somewhere completely different, because the missing pieces of one tomb may have been carried away thousands of years ago. A vessel could have been reused. A coffin could have been relocated. A mummy could have been hidden in another valley. A piece of the original burial equipment could be sitting in a museum collection, waiting to be correctly identified. This possibility changes everything. The pharaoh may not be missing. The evidence may simply be scattered. And modern archaeology is becoming increasingly good at putting scattered evidence back together. CT scanning can reveal hidden structures inside mummies. DNA can establish family relationships. Chemical analysis can identify materials. Digital mapping can reconstruct damaged tombs. Remote sensing can reveal structures beneath the ground without disturbing them. Technology is giving archaeologists new ways to investigate old mysteries. But technology alone cannot answer the most difficult question. Why was this pharaoh forgotten? Was it political? Was it religious? Was the ruler defeated? Was the dynasty unstable? Did later kings simply decide that this person was not worth remembering? Or did someone deliberately attack his memory? There may be no single answer. And perhaps that is why the mystery remains so compelling. The desert has preserved the tomb. The tomb has preserved the evidence. But history has lost the name. For thousands of years, that forgotten ruler has existed in a strange state between being remembered and being erased. And now archaeologists are standing at the edge of his story. The walls have begun to speak. The symbols are beginning to make sense. The ancient burial landscape is slowly revealing its secrets. But one piece is still missing: the name. And until that name is recovered, the Pharaoh remains exactly where he has been for thousands of years. Not alive, not completely forgotten, but waiting in the darkness for history to remember him. There are moments in archaeology when a discovery stops being about the past and suddenly becomes deeply personal. A skeleton becomes a person. A mummy becomes a ruler. A broken inscription becomes a voice. And a sealed chamber becomes the last surviving message from someone who died thousands of years ago. But what happens when that message has been damaged? What happens when the one thing that could tell us who the person was has been destroyed? That is the problem facing archaeologists investigating Egypt's mysterious royal burials. They can recover architecture. They can date materials. They can identify religious symbols. They can examine human remains. But sometimes, the most important evidence has disappeared: the name. And in ancient Egypt, losing the name was almost the same as losing the person. To understand why, we need to go back to the way Egyptians imagined existence after death. They believed that death was not an ending. It was a transition into another state of being. The body was only one part of the person. The spirit needed protection. The name needed to survive. The tomb needed to remain functional. And offerings had to continue. This is why Egyptian tombs were filled with objects that seem strangely ordinary to us. Food, clothing, perfumes, furniture, tools, jewelry, even games. The dead needed more than a coffin. They needed a complete environment. And for a pharaoh, that environment had to reflect his royal status. A ruler who had controlled armies and commanded thousands of workers could not simply be buried with nothing. His tomb had to communicate power. The walls could show him defeating enemies. The gods could appear beside him. Sacred texts could guide him. The royal name could be repeated. Everything was designed to reinforce one message: the king still existed. He was still powerful. He had not disappeared. But then history intervened. Political struggles changed Egypt. Dynasties ended. New rulers took power. Religious beliefs evolved. Temples were abandoned. Tombs were robbed. And the carefully constructed memory of individual rulers began to break apart. This is especially important when looking at Egypt's periods of political instability. During the Second Intermediate Period, Egypt was divided between rival powers. Different kings ruled different regions. Foreign rulers controlled parts of the country. The traditional image of a unified Egyptian kingdom had fractured. And in the middle of this instability, Abydos became the center of its own royal tradition. The rulers associated with the Abydos dynasty left behind relatively little evidence compared with Egypt's most famous pharaohs. That is precisely what makes them fascinating. They were kings, but they did not leave the kind of monuments that would guarantee their names would survive. Their history became fragile. And when history becomes fragile, archaeology becomes essential. A single tomb can suddenly transform an uncertain theory into a fact. That is what happened with the discovery of the tomb associated with Senebke. Before the discovery, the existence of an Abydos dynasty was difficult to prove. After the discovery, there was a royal burial. There was a king. There was physical evidence. And there was a story. The remains suggested that Senebkay had suffered multiple injuries. The wounds were not simply signs of disease. They suggested violence. His skull had suffered trauma. His body showed injuries. His hands had been damaged. It is possible that he died in combat. If so, this forgotten ruler may have been killed during the struggle for control of Egypt. That possibility gives the entire dynasty a different atmosphere. These were not peaceful years. They were years of competition. Power was unstable, and rulers could die violently. Now consider the newly discovered royal tomb. It is larger. Its architecture is more substantial. Its connection to the sacred landscape is clear. The tomb contains imagery associated with powerful, protective deities, and yet the ruler's identity remains uncertain. That creates a fascinating possibility. Could this be another ruler from the same mysterious period? Could the tomb belong to an earlier or more powerful king? Could it help reconstruct the political structure of southern Egypt during one of its most confusing periods? Or could it belong to someone completely unexpected? Archaeologists cannot simply guess. They need evidence. And evidence can come from the strangest places. A piece of pottery can reveal a date. A construction technique can identify a period. A fragment of plaster can reveal an artistic tradition. A burial arrangement can indicate social status. A tiny inscription can identify a ruler. Even the mud used to construct a wall can sometimes reveal where the material came from. Every detail matters. This is especially true when the royal name is missing. The missing cartouche becomes the central puzzle. Ancient Egyptian cartouches were designed to protect royal names. The king's name was enclosed within an oval symbol. It stood out from surrounding writing. It told everyone who was responsible for the monument. It was an ancient form of royal branding. But this branding had another purpose. It protected memory. A king's name could be spoken, written, read, repeated, and therefore remembered. Destroying it was an attack on that memory. That is why archaeologists examine damaged royal inscriptions so carefully. If the damage looks random, natural causes may be responsible. But if the same type of damage appears repeatedly around a ruler's name, another explanation becomes possible. Someone may have wanted the king erased. This practice is known as damnatio memoriae in modern discussions, although the exact Egyptian examples vary and should not always be reduced to a single Roman concept. The important point is simple. Ancient rulers understood the political power of memory. They knew that controlling the past could strengthen the present. And sometimes, the easiest way to control the past was to destroy the evidence. Hatshepsut's story shows how powerful this could be. She had ruled Egypt. She had built monumental architecture. She had commissioned inscriptions. She had created an enormous royal legacy. And yet, after her death, her name and images were deliberately removed from some monuments. For a long time, this made her role difficult to reconstruct. But the evidence survived. Her temple survived. Fragments of her inscriptions survived. Her monuments survived. Eventually, archaeologists were able to restore her place in history. The lesson is important. Erasure does not always work. Stone can survive longer than politics. A damaged name can sometimes be reconstructed. A forgotten ruler can sometimes return. And this is where modern archaeology has an enormous advantage over the ancient world. We have technologies that the original builders could never have imagined. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing methods can help identify structures beneath the surface. Three-dimensional scanning can document fragile chambers. CT scans can examine mummies without destroying them. DNA analysis can establish family relationships. Microscopic analysis can identify traces of materials that were invisible to earlier generations. Even the chemistry of ancient remains can tell us where a person may have lived, what they ate, or what substances were used during burial. The dead are beginning to tell us things the living never recorded. And sometimes the mummy itself becomes the key. Take Tutankhamun. His tomb became famous because it survived with an extraordinary amount of burial equipment. But the mummy revealed something different. It showed that the young king had suffered serious health problems. DNA studies also helped reconstruct his family. Suddenly, the golden pharaoh became a human being. A young man, a son, a patient, a ruler struggling with a body that may have made ordinary movement difficult. Ramses II tells a different story. He ruled for decades. He became one of Egypt's most powerful kings. His monuments are enormous. His name survived. But even he eventually became a hidden mummy. His body was moved from its original tomb and placed in a secret cache with other royal remains. Thousands of years later, archaeologists discovered him. The king who had once ruled an empire was lying in a hidden chamber. That contrast is extraordinary. The most powerful people in ancient Egypt eventually became dependent on priests and tomb workers to protect their remains. And even those protections sometimes failed. This is why the discovery of a lost royal tomb is so much more than finding an ancient building. It is an opportunity to reconstruct a human story. Who was this ruler? What did he believe? Who were his enemies? Who succeeded him? Did his descendants honor him? Did later rulers fear him? Did someone erase his name? And where is his body now? Perhaps the mummy has already been found. Perhaps it is lying in a museum under another identity. Perhaps it remains hidden in an undiscovered chamber. Or perhaps the tomb itself contains another secret passage leading toward a second burial. This is not impossible. Ancient Egyptian tombs were often modified, expanded, reused, and repaired. A corridor that looks like a dead end may conceal another space. A damaged wall may hide a blocked doorway. A secondary passage may have been constructed to move a body after flooding. And a chamber that appears empty may have once connected to another part of the burial complex. Every possibility keeps the investigation alive. The forgotten pharaoh may be closer than we think. The question is whether the evidence will be strong enough to bring his name back. Because after thousands of years, the greatest treasure may not be gold. It may be a name. One surviving name could restore an entire chapter of history. One inscription could identify a king. One mummy could reveal a family. One hidden chamber could change what we know about an entire dynasty. And somewhere beneath Egypt's ancient landscape, there may still be a message waiting for someone to find it. A message written for eternity. A message that begins with only one word: the name of the king. What if the greatest clue to a forgotten pharaoh is not inside his tomb at all? What if the answer is hidden in another mummy, another burial chamber, or a forgotten object sitting in a museum thousands of miles away? That possibility changes the entire investigation. Because ancient Egypt was not a collection of isolated tombs. It was a connected world. Kings married into royal families. Priests moved mummies. Tomb equipment was reused. Monuments were dismantled. Objects traveled from one burial to another. And when a tomb was threatened, the ancient Egyptians sometimes took the most valuable thing inside it and moved it somewhere safer: the body. This means that archaeologists searching for a lost pharaoh may need to follow a trail that stretches across centuries. And the trail can begin with a mummy whose identity is already known. One of the most remarkable examples is Ramses II. He ruled Egypt for roughly 6 decades, an extraordinary reign that allowed him to become one of the most powerful rulers in Egyptian history. His monuments are everywhere. His statues are enormous. His name appears across temples. His reign became associated with military campaigns, construction projects, and imperial ambition. If there was ever a pharaoh who seemed impossible to erase, It was Ramses II, and yet his body eventually disappeared from his original tomb. The reason was simple. His tomb was no longer safe. Royal tombs were magnets for thieves. The very monuments designed to guarantee eternal life could become targets because of the wealth buried inside. So priests intervened. They moved royal mummies. They hid them. They placed them together in secret locations. Centuries later, archaeologists discovered these hidden royal remains. And suddenly, kings who had been separated from their original tombs were reunited in death. But not always completely. Their bodies could be identified. Their original tombs could sometimes be identified. Yet the objects originally buried with them might be gone forever. This creates a strange archaeological problem. A mummy tells you who the person was. A tomb tells you where they were supposed to spend eternity, but neither necessarily tells you the entire story. The missing objects can be just as important. And this is where the investigation into a lost pharaoh becomes fascinating. Imagine that the mummy of an unknown king is discovered in a royal cache. The body has been preserved. The linen contains inscriptions. The name might even be written somewhere. But where is the tomb? Now imagine the opposite. The tomb is discovered. The architecture strongly suggests a royal burial. The religious imagery confirms the status. The date fits a particular dynasty. But the mummy is gone. Suddenly, archaeologists have two halves of a mystery. One half is a person without a home. The other is a home without a person. The challenge is proving that they belong together. Sometimes the answer can be found in the smallest details. A piece of linen, a fragment of a coffin, a reused inscription, a pottery vessel, a royal title, a distinctive architectural feature. The evidence has to be compared across multiple discoveries. And modern technology makes this possible in ways earlier archaeologists could only dream about. CT scans have transformed mummy research. Instead of unwrapping a mummy, scientists can examine the body layer by layer. They can see bones, teeth, fractures, objects hidden beneath the wrappings, evidence of disease, even signs of how the body was prepared. This is especially important because mummies can preserve biological information for thousands of years. A skeleton can reveal age. It can reveal injuries. It can show repeated physical stress. Teeth can reveal diet and childhood conditions. Chemical traces can provide clues about where a person lived. And DNA can sometimes reveal relationships between individuals. The ancient Egyptians wrote their family histories in stone. Modern science can sometimes reconstruct them from bone. That combination is incredibly powerful. Take Tutankhamun. His mummy became famous after the discovery of his tomb in 1922. The burial chamber contained an astonishing collection of objects: gold, jewelry, chariots, furniture, weapons, clothing, food, and multiple coffins. One of them was made of solid gold. But the greatest scientific discoveries came later. Researchers used CT scans and DNA analysis to investigate the young king. The results helped identify members of his family and revealed serious health problems. Tutankhamun was not simply the golden boy of ancient Egypt. He was a real human being who lived in a complicated royal family. His body preserved evidence that his monuments never could. And that is exactly why scientists are so interested in unidentified royal remains. A mummy can become the final key to a historical mystery. Perhaps the nameless pharaoh's body has already been discovered. Perhaps archaeologists simply have not recognized it yet. There is another famous mystery that shows how difficult royal identification can be. Nefertiti. She was one of the most recognizable women of ancient Egypt. Her famous bust shows a woman with an elegant neck high cheekbones, and distinctive facial features. Her name means something like, "The beautiful one has come." She was the wife of Akhenaten, the controversial ruler who transformed Egyptian religion and moved the royal court to a new capital. Nefertiti was not merely a queen standing beside her husband. Her imagery suggests an extraordinary level of authority. She appears in religious scenes. She participates in royal rituals. She is shown in ways that were unusual for queens. And yet, her burial place remains uncertain. That is one of Egypt's great archaeological mysteries. Where did Nefertiti go after her death? Was she buried in the royal tomb at Amarna? Was her body moved? Was her burial hidden? Could an unidentified mummy actually be hers? Several theories have been proposed. Some researchers have suggested that unidentified female mummies could be connected to the royal family. Other investigations have examined hidden chambers and possible burial locations. But so far, no identification has achieved universal acceptance. And that uncertainty is important. Archaeology is not about declaring an exciting theory to be true simply because it sounds convincing. The evidence has to survive testing. The same principle applies to any newly discovered royal tomb. If researchers believe they have found a lost pharaoh, they need more than a beautiful chamber. They need evidence that can withstand scrutiny. The architecture must fit. The artifacts must fit. The inscriptions must fit. The chronology must fit. And ideally, biological evidence should support the conclusion. This is why an ancient royal tomb can take years to understand. The excavation itself may be only the beginning. Every object must be documented. Every layer must be recorded. Every fragment has to be preserved. And sometimes, the most important discoveries happen after the archaeologists leave the field. A laboratory can reveal what the excavation could not. A microscope can identify a material. A scanner can reveal a hidden object. A DNA sample can reveal a family connection. A computer model can reconstruct a damaged face. Technology is turning archaeology into something increasingly precise. But there is still something technology cannot do. It cannot recover evidence that has completely vanished. If a royal name was destroyed, scientists cannot simply scan the stone and make the original letters magically appear. If a mummy was burned, there may be no DNA left. If gold was melted down thousands of years ago, its original shape may be impossible to reconstruct. If thieves carried objects across the ancient world, archaeologists may never know where they went. This is why every surviving fragment matters. Even a tiny inscription can become priceless. And the mysterious royal tomb at Abydos may contain exactly that kind of evidence. The protective figures at the entrance suggest a royal burial. The architecture points toward an important ruler. The size of the structure indicates significant resources. But the name remains frustratingly unclear. Perhaps the cartouche is damaged beyond recognition. Perhaps future excavations will uncover another fragment. Perhaps a nearby chamber contains the missing inscription. Or perhaps an artifact removed from the tomb long ago will eventually be connected to it. The answer could even be hiding in plain sight. A museum object labeled as unknown, a fragment stored in an archaeological collection, a piece of coffin whose inscription has never been fully understood, a mummy whose identity has been debated for decades. This is how lost history sometimes returns, not with a dramatic announcement, not with a golden treasure, but with two pieces of evidence that finally fit together. And when they do, a forgotten ruler can suddenly become visible again. His name can be restored. His dynasty can be reconstructed. His political enemies can be identified. His reign can be placed into context. His burial can be understood. And perhaps his disappearance can finally be explained. But there is one possibility that would make the discovery even more extraordinary. What if the lost pharaoh's tomb contains evidence not just about the king himself, but about the people who came after him? Because sometimes, what happened to a ruler after death tells us more about the politics of the living than anything he did while alive. A missing body, a damaged name, a hidden cache, a deliberately sealed chamber. These are not just burial mysteries. They may be political clues. And if that is true, then the tomb at Abydos could be hiding a story far more dangerous than anyone expected. A story about a king who was not merely forgotten. A king who may have been deliberately removed from history. And if archaeologists can recover even one more piece of his identity, the silence surrounding him could finally begin to break. The most dangerous thing about a forgotten pharaoh is not that we know nothing about him. It is that we may think we know something when the evidence is telling us a completely different story. Ancient Egypt has given us monuments that appear permanent, but even stone can lie when pieces are missing. A broken statue can hide the identity of a ruler. A damaged cartouche can erase a name. A reused coffin can create confusion. And a mummy found far from its original tomb can make archaeologists reconstruct a journey that happened thousands of years ago. The deeper researchers investigate, the more they realize that Egypt's history is not a straight line. It is a shattered puzzle. And sometimes, one missing piece can change the entire picture. This is especially true when the missing piece is a pharaoh. A king was supposed to stand at the center of Egyptian society. He was the bridge between humans and the gods. He commanded armies. He controlled resources. He commissioned temples. He organized enormous building projects. And after death, he was expected to become part of the divine order. So how could such a person disappear? The answer may be hidden in one of the most important ideas in Egyptian civilization: memory. To the Egyptians, remembering the dead was a responsibility. Offerings had to be made. Names had to be spoken. Tombs had to be maintained. Images had to remain recognizable. If the name disappeared, the person's existence could be threatened. This explains why Egyptian rulers covered their monuments with their names. It also explains why political enemies sometimes attacked those names. A king did not need to destroy another ruler's body to damage his legacy. He could destroy the name, the face, the image, the inscriptions, the monuments. And future generations might never know that person had once ruled. This makes archaeological erasure one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient Egypt. Because sometimes the absence of evidence is itself evidence. A statue missing its face, a cartouche carefully damaged, a royal figure removed from a wall, a monument reused by another ruler. These details can reveal conflicts that written history never described. One of the clearest examples is Akhenaten. Before his reign, Egypt had a powerful religious tradition centered around many gods. Then Akhenaten changed the system dramatically. He elevated the Aten, represented by the sun disk, and reduced the influence of traditional religious institutions. He built a new capital. He introduced a radically different artistic style. And he placed himself and his family at the center of this new religious world. For a time, Egypt was transformed. But after Akhenaten's death, the changes did not last. Traditional religious practices returned. His capital was abandoned. His monuments were dismantled. His memory was attacked. Later generations had little interest in celebrating a king who had challenged the established order. And that is one reason the period surrounding Akhenaten became so difficult to reconstruct. The evidence was intentionally disrupted. Names were removed. Buildings were dismantled. Materials were reused. History had been edited. Then Tutankhamun appeared. The young king reversed many of Akhenaten's religious changes. His reign was short. His tomb was relatively modest compared with the great royal monuments. And yet, because his burial survived with so much of its equipment, Tutankhamun became one of the most famous pharaohs in modern history. His discovery teaches us something important. Sometimes historical importance has nothing to do with the size of the original monument. A small tomb can transform our understanding of an entire period. That is why the discovery of an unknown royal burial can be so valuable. Even if the tomb contains no treasure, it can still contain information. The architecture can reveal how tomb construction changed. The inscriptions can reveal religious beliefs. The burial objects can reveal technology and trade. The mummy can reveal health and ancestry. And the absence of objects can reveal what happened after the burial. This is where the mysterious Abydos tomb becomes especially interesting. Its location places it within one of Egypt's most sacred landscapes. Its architectural features connect it to royal burial traditions. Its protective imagery confirms the importance of the person buried there. But the identity remains uncertain, and the possibility that it belonged to a forgotten ruler from a turbulent period makes the mystery even deeper. The second intermediate period was an era when political control was fragmented. Northern Egypt was influenced by foreign rulers. Southern Egypt maintained its own royal power. Different groups competed for control, and Abydos became the center of a small royal dynasty. These rulers were not the famous kings whose statues fill museums. They existed in the gaps, and that is precisely where archaeology becomes most valuable. When the historical record is incomplete, physical evidence becomes the story. The tomb of Senebkay is a perfect example. His remains revealed evidence of severe injuries. He may have died violently. If that interpretation is correct, his body tells us something about the political world around him. This was not a peaceful era. The king may have been required to fight. He may have died far from home. His death may have been connected to the struggle for control of Egypt. And yet, despite his violent end, he received a royal burial. That tells us something else. Even during political chaos, the rituals surrounding kingship remained important. A ruler could die in battle and still be prepared for eternity. His body could be preserved. His name could be recorded. His tomb could be constructed. His connection to the gods could be maintained. This is one of the reasons Abydos mattered so much. The sacred landscape gave royal burials a religious meaning that went beyond politics. The dead king was connected to Osiris, the god who died and returned. The king who hoped to do the same. The tomb, therefore, became a bridge between the physical world and the afterlife, and that bridge had to be protected. This brings us back to the question of why so many royal tombs eventually became empty. Sometimes the answer was simple: robbers. But sometimes, the Egyptians themselves were responsible. Priests moved bodies. Tombs were opened for repairs. Mummies were transferred. Burial equipment was reorganized. The original tomb could be abandoned while the deceased continued to be honored elsewhere. This creates an archaeological paradox. The safest place for a mummy might have been outside its own tomb. A royal tomb could become a dangerous target. A hidden chamber could become safer. And eventually, thousands of years later, archaeologists would have to reconstruct the entire journey. That is what happened with several famous rulers. Their bodies were found. Their tombs were identified. But the two were separated. And this separation creates another possibility. The mummy of an unknown ruler could be sitting in a collection today. The body may have been discovered decades ago. Researchers may have assumed it belonged to someone else. Only new evidence could change that conclusion. This has happened before. Mummies have been re-examined using modern technology. Names written on linen have been reconsidered. DNA has changed family trees. CT scans have corrected earlier assumptions. And faces have been digitally reconstructed. Imagine what would happen if the mystery pharaoh were identified this way. A mummy that had been labeled unknown could suddenly become a king. A forgotten name could return. A dynasty could gain another ruler. A political timeline could shift. A mysterious gap in history could finally be filled. But there is an even bigger question. Why did this king disappear in the first place? Perhaps he ruled for only a short time. Perhaps his dynasty was defeated. Perhaps his successors had no reason to preserve his memory. Perhaps his monuments were dismantled. Or perhaps his name was intentionally erased. If the last possibility is true, the tomb could become evidence of a political struggle that historians have never fully understood. The damage itself could be the clue. Every erased letter would matter. Every broken image would matter. Every reused stone would matter. Because someone may have wanted the king to disappear, but they made one mistake. They left the tomb behind. They left the architecture. They left the religious symbols. They left the fragments. And thousands of years later, those fragments are beginning to speak. The desert may have hidden the pharaoh's name, but it could not completely erase his existence. Now archaeologists have the opportunity to reconstruct the story from whatever survived. And if the missing name is eventually recovered, we may discover that this forgotten ruler was not a minor figure at all. He may have stood at the center of a forgotten struggle for Egypt itself. The question is no longer simply, who was buried here? The question is much bigger. What happened to this king after he died? Who wanted his memory gone? And what does his disappearance tell us about the people who ruled Egypt after him? Because the answer may be waiting not in the tomb itself, but in the evidence of what happened to it afterward. And that is where the mystery becomes truly dangerous. The deeper archaeologists descend into the story of a lost pharaoh, the stranger the evidence becomes. A tomb can survive for thousands of years, yet the person it was built for can almost completely vanish. A name can disappear. A mummy can be moved. A coffin can be reused. A statue can be broken. And a royal monument can become nothing more than a pile of stones beneath the desert. But sometimes, the fragments left behind are enough to reconstruct a story that someone once tried to erase. That is why the search for a lost pharaoh is not simply a search for a tomb. It is a search for a missing identity. And identity in ancient Egypt was everything. A pharaoh's name was carved into stone because the Egyptians believed that as long as the name continued to exist, the person could continue to exist. This belief explains why royal names appear again and again across Egyptian monuments. The king's name was not decoration. It was protection. It was a promise that the ruler would not disappear. And yet, some rulers did disappear. Their names became obscure. Their monuments were dismantled. Their tombs were forgotten. Their stories survived only in fragments. How could this happen to someone who had once been powerful enough to command an entire kingdom? The answer may lie in the violent political transitions that repeatedly reshaped Egypt. Egyptian history is often presented as a long sequence of powerful dynasties, but behind those dynasties were periods of instability. Kings died. Heirs were young. Rival families competed. Foreign powers invaded. Religious institutions gained influence. And sometimes, the royal line simply broke apart. During these moments, a ruler's legacy could become vulnerable. A new king did not always want to preserve the memory of his predecessor, especially if that predecessor represented a rival claim to the throne. This is one reason the archaeological evidence from unstable periods is so important. The gaps in the historical record may not be empty by accident. They may reflect political decisions. Consider what happens when a new dynasty takes power. The new ruler wants legitimacy. He needs to convince the population that his reign is rightful. He needs the support of priests. He needs the loyalty of officials. And he needs a connection to the ancient traditions of kingship. One way to achieve this is to present the previous period as chaotic or illegitimate. If the former ruler disappears from official records, the new king's position becomes easier to justify. This is not unique to Egypt. Throughout human history, victorious rulers have rewritten the past. But Egypt left behind something unusually valuable: stone. Tons of it. Even when texts were altered, pieces of the original world often survived. A broken column, a reused wall block, a fragment of a statue, a damaged relief, a piece of painted plaster. These objects can preserve memories that official history tried to remove. And that is exactly why archaeologists pay attention to reused stones. Imagine walking through a later Egyptian temple and finding a block that clearly came from an older building. The block contains a partially destroyed royal name. Suddenly, an unknown king becomes visible. The monument may be gone, but the stone survived. And if enough fragments are found, the original structure can sometimes be reconstructed. This is how forgotten rulers return. Not all at once, piece by piece. The mysterious royal tomb at Abydos could work in exactly the same way. The tomb itself may not provide the full answer, but the surrounding landscape could. Nearby structures, later burials, reused building materials, pottery, inscribed fragments. Even the location of the tomb can provide clues. Abydos was not chosen randomly. The area was deeply connected with the cult of Osiris. Ancient Egyptians believed Osiris had been killed and dismembered before being restored and becoming ruler of the underworld. For the Egyptians, this was more than a myth. It was a model for death and resurrection. The deceased hoped to follow the same path, and a king buried at Abydos could symbolically join Osiris. This made the area one of the most important religious landscapes in Egypt. Pharaohs and wealthy individuals wanted to associate themselves with the sacred place. Temples were constructed, offerings were made, festivals were held. Pilgrims traveled there. The landscape accumulated layers of history. That means the newly discovered royal tomb is part of something much larger. It is not an isolated building. It belongs to a sacred network that was used for generations. And this raises an important question. Why would a forgotten ruler choose this location? Perhaps because he wanted the religious prestige of Abydos. Perhaps he wanted to associate himself with Osiris. Perhaps he was attempting to strengthen his claim to kingship during a period of political competition. Or perhaps his burial there was a deliberate statement. I am the rightful ruler. I belong here. I will join the great kings. If that is true, the tomb's location could reveal something about the political ambitions of the person buried inside. The architecture may reveal even more. Royal tombs evolved over time. Early Egyptian rulers were buried beneath enormous monuments. Later kings developed increasingly complex underground burial systems. Corridors became longer. Chambers became more elaborate. Religious texts covered walls. The architecture itself became part of the journey to the afterlife. A tomb was not simply a container. It was a map, a path, a ritual landscape. Every corridor had meaning. Every chamber had a purpose. Every image could protect the deceased. This is why the design of the Abydos tomb matters. If its layout resembles known royal burials from a specific period, archaeologists can narrow down when it was built. That may help identify the dynasty. And once the dynasty is known, the list of possible rulers becomes smaller. Suddenly, the mystery changes. Instead of searching for one unknown king among thousands of historical figures, researchers may be looking for only a handful. That is how archaeology works. One clue reduces the possibilities. Another clue reduces them further, until eventually the evidence points toward one individual. But there is still a major obstacle: the missing name. A cartouche may have once identified the ruler, If that cartouche is damaged, the entire investigation becomes more difficult. Yet even damaged inscriptions can contain useful information. The shape of surviving signs can reveal parts of a name. Royal titles can reveal status. The position of a damaged inscription can tell researchers whether it belonged to a king, queen, prince, or official. And sometimes, traces of pigment survive. A faded blue or yellow mark can reveal that a surface was once covered in writing. Advanced imaging techniques can sometimes detect details that are almost invisible to the naked eye. The ancient Egyptians may have lost the name, but modern science can sometimes recover the ghost of the writing. This is why future excavation at the tomb could be so important. The first discovery may only reveal the entrance. The next season could reveal another chamber. A blocked doorway could lead somewhere unexpected. A fragment could complete an inscription. A burial shaft could contain objects removed from the original chamber. And a small object could provide the missing connection. This has happened repeatedly in Egyptian archaeology. Major discoveries often begin with something that looks insignificant. A broken piece of pottery, a small statue, a damaged inscription, a piece of linen. Then the context changes everything. The object becomes part of a larger story. And one of the most fascinating possibilities is that the missing pharaoh's burial equipment may already have been found somewhere else. Remember what happened to the royal mummies. When tombs became dangerous, priests moved the bodies. They sometimes reused coffins. They placed mummies in hidden caches. The original burial equipment could be separated from the body. A mummy could end up hundreds of meters away. A coffin could be reused for another person. A name could be written over an older inscription. This means an object found in one tomb may have originally belonged somewhere else. For archaeologists, that creates a giant historical puzzle. But it also creates opportunity. If researchers find a royal object bearing the right name, title, or artistic style, they can compare it with the unknown tomb. The object might provide the connection, and then the mystery could suddenly collapse. The empty tomb would have a king. The king would have a tomb. The scattered pieces would come together. But perhaps the most fascinating possibility is the mummy itself. What if the ruler's body has already been found? Egypt contains numerous unidentified or debated mummies. Some belong to royal families. Others belonged to elite officials. Some have uncertain identities. Modern technology continues to reevaluate them. A mummy once considered insignificant can become historically important when new evidence appears. CT scans can reveal age and injuries. Dental analysis can establish biological relationships. DNA can connect individuals across generations. Chemical analysis can reveal geographic origins. And facial reconstruction can provide a visual impression of what a person may have looked like in life. Imagine standing in front of a mummy that has been anonymous for more than 3,000 years. Then a laboratory report reveals that the person was a king. Suddenly, the museum label would no longer say unknown male. It would carry a royal name. A ruler who had disappeared from history would have a face again, a body again, a story again. That possibility is what makes Egyptian archaeology so addictive. Every discovery creates another question, and every answer can open another mystery. The lost pharaoh may have ruled for only a few years. He may have been defeated. He may have died in battle. He may have been peacefully buried and simply forgotten. Or his successors may have deliberately erased him. At this point, we do not know. But the tomb itself gives us something incredibly valuable. Evidence that this person mattered. Someone built this place. Someone invested enormous resources into it. Someone performed the rituals. Someone believed this ruler deserved eternal life. And then, somehow, his identity disappeared. Thousands of years later, archaeologists are reversing that disappearance. They are bringing the fragments back together. They are asking the questions that history stopped asking. Who was he? Why was he buried here? Who came after him? What happened to his mummy? And why did his name vanish? Perhaps the final answer will come from an inscription, perhaps from DNA, perhaps from a hidden chamber, or perhaps from an object that has been sitting unnoticed in a museum collection for generations. But somewhere, the missing piece exists. The ancient Egyptians tried to defeat death by preserving the body and the name. The body may have survived. The tomb survived. And now, after thousands of years, the name may be the only thing still waiting to return. Because if archaeologists can recover it, they will not simply identify a tomb. The tomb is silent now. For thousands of years, nothing moved through its corridors. No priest carried offerings through the entrance. No family member came to speak the dead king's name. No servant entered carrying food, wine, perfume, or fresh linen. The world outside changed completely. Dynasties rose and collapsed. Cities disappeared. Languages evolved. Empires conquered Egypt and vanished themselves. The temples became ruins. The desert shifted. And still, beneath the earth, the tomb remained, waiting. That is perhaps the most haunting part of archaeology. We think we are discovering the past, but sometimes it feels as though the past has been waiting for us. And the deeper researchers investigate the mysterious royal burial at Abydos, the more important one question becomes: what happened to the person who was supposed to be here? Because an ancient Egyptian royal tomb was never intended to be empty. Everything about its design was created around a specific individual. The chambers, the rituals, the religious imagery, the burial equipment, the inscriptions, the location. All of it existed because someone believed this particular person deserved eternal life. Yet today, the identity of that ruler remains uncertain. It is almost as if history itself has stolen the body from the tomb. But there is another possibility. Perhaps the body was never meant to remain there. Ancient Egyptians understood that royal tombs could become dangerous. Once the location of a wealthy burial became known, thieves had a reason to find it. The promise of eternal life meant little to criminals interested in gold, and royal tombs contained plenty of it. Jewelry, precious metals, decorated furniture, ceremonial objects, perfumes, weapons, and sometimes entire coffins made from valuable materials. The problem became so serious that ancient officials eventually developed a different strategy. They moved the dead. Royal mummies were transferred from their original tombs and hidden in secret locations. This was not disrespect. It was protection. The priests were trying to save the kings from the very people who wanted to steal their treasures. And this creates a fascinating contradiction. A pharaoh could spend his entire lifetime preparing an elaborate tomb. He could order mountains of stone to be carved. He could decorate the walls with religious texts. He could place his name everywhere. And yet, centuries later, the safest place for his body might be somewhere completely different. That means a lost pharaoh's tomb and a lost pharaoh's mummy can become two separate mysteries. One tells us where the king was supposed to rest. The other tells us where ancient priests eventually took him. Finding both would be extraordinary. Finding them with enough evidence to prove they belong together would be even more extraordinary. And this is where the search for the nameless ruler becomes more than an archaeological treasure hunt. It becomes a reconstruction of a journey that may have begun with a coronation and ended with a hidden burial. Think about the life of an Egyptian king. He was born into a world where kingship was sacred. He was raised within a powerful royal family. He learned the responsibilities of leadership. He inherited an enormous bureaucracy. He controlled armies. He commanded construction projects. He participated in religious ceremonies. And at some point, he began preparing for death. His tomb would have been part of that preparation. Workers would quarry stone. Artists would decorate walls. Priests would plan rituals. Craftsmen would prepare burial equipment. Everything would be organized around a single moment: the king's death. Then the body would be mummified. The heart and other organs would be treated according to religious tradition. The body would be dried with natron. Resins and oils would help preserve it. Linen would be wrapped around the body. Amulets would be placed among the bandages. Then the mummy would be sealed inside a coffin. The funeral procession would begin. Offerings would be presented. Rituals would be performed. And finally, the king would enter his eternal home. For the Egyptians, this was not the end. It was the beginning of another existence. The tomb was supposed to remain connected to the living world. Offerings could be brought. Prayers could be spoken. The deceased could continue to receive the benefits of the rituals. But if the tomb was robbed, damaged, or abandoned, the entire system was threatened. And if the name disappeared, the danger became even greater. This is why the missing name from the Abydos burial is so important. A royal tomb without a readable king's name is like a book with its title page torn away. The chapters may still exist. The illustrations may still exist. The paper may still exist. But the identity of the author is missing. And that missing identity affects everything. Who built the tomb? Who was the intended audience? What political circumstances surrounded the burial? Which dynasty controlled the region? Who succeeded the king? Who wanted his memory preserved? Who wanted it forgotten? These questions cannot be answered confidently until the ruler is identified. But the tomb can still provide clues. Its architecture can establish a period. Its religious imagery can reveal beliefs. Its construction techniques can connect it to other royal monuments. Its burial arrangement can reveal social status. Even the size of the tomb can tell us something. Building a massive underground structure required enormous resources. The ruler had to control labor. He needed access to stone. He needed craftsmen. He needed priests. He needed political authority. In other words, this was not the burial of an ordinary person. Someone powerful was placed here. And that alone tells us something remarkable. The forgotten king was important enough to receive a royal burial. Yet somehow, his name did not survive. That contradiction is at the center of the mystery. Perhaps the ruler died during a period of political instability. Perhaps his successor rejected his claim. Perhaps a rival dynasty took control. Perhaps the tomb was damaged during later conflict. Or perhaps his name was intentionally erased. If deliberate erasure occurred, then the damaged inscriptions may eventually reveal more than the king's identity. They could reveal who wanted him forgotten. Ancient Egypt was not immune to political propaganda. Kings presented themselves as legitimate. Enemies were portrayed as chaotic. Victories were celebrated. Defeats could be ignored. And inconvenient rulers could disappear from official narratives. Hatshepsut's story demonstrates how powerful this process could be. After her death, parts of her legacy were deliberately altered. Her images were removed. Her name was excluded from some official contexts. For generations, her position in Egyptian history became difficult to understand. But her monuments survived. Her temple survived. Her achievements survived. And eventually, historians reconstructed her story. The same thing may be happening with another forgotten ruler. Perhaps the evidence was damaged but not destroyed. Perhaps the name exists in fragments. Perhaps a later monument reused his stones. Perhaps his burial equipment was moved to another tomb. Perhaps his mummy is already inside a museum. The pieces may already be there. They simply have not been connected. This is why modern archaeology is so different from the archaeology of a century ago. Researchers now have tools that allow them to examine ancient remains without destroying them. CT scanning can reveal what lies beneath mummy wrappings. DNA can help establish family connections. Remote sensing can reveal buried structures. Three-dimensional imaging can preserve fragile architecture digitally. Chemical analysis can identify the origins of materials. Even microscopic traces can become meaningful. A tiny piece of resin can reveal how a body was prepared. A grain of pollen can reveal the environment. A fragment of pigment can reveal the original decoration. A tooth can reveal diet. A bone can reveal injury. A piece of linen can sometimes contain an inscription. The smallest clues can carry the largest answers. And perhaps the most important clue will come from the mummy. If the mummy of the unknown ruler is located, scientists could compare its biological information with other royal remains. Was the person related to known kings? Did he belong to a particular royal family? Was he young or old? Did he suffer injuries? Did he die violently? Did he have evidence of disease? Even his physical condition could help reconstruct his life. This is exactly what happened with other famous Egyptian mummies. Tutankhamun's remains revealed details that the golden treasures of his tomb could not. His family relationships became clearer. His health problems became clearer. His short life became more understandable. Ramses II's mummy provided another kind of information. The ruler, who had once appeared almost superhuman in his monuments, could finally be examined as an elderly human being. His body showed the effects of age. His bones carried evidence of a lifetime. His mummy transformed a legendary king into a real person. The same could happen with the unknown Pharaoh. Imagine that researchers finally identify him. Suddenly, thousands of years of silence would end. His name would be restored. His dynasty would be confirmed. His reign could be reconstructed. His tomb could be officially recognized. And perhaps the circumstances of his disappearance would finally become clear. But there is another question. What if his name is never recovered? Would the discovery still matter? Absolutely. Because archaeology is not only about names. Sometimes the anonymous dead reveal more than the famous. An unnamed king can show us how a particular burial tradition developed. His tomb can reveal changes in architecture. His objects can reveal trade networks. His remains can reveal disease and diet. His burial can reveal religious beliefs. And his disappearance can reveal political instability. In other words, even without a name, the tomb can rewrite history. But a name would make the story unforgettable. That is why archaeologists continue searching. Not because they expect to find a treasure chest. Not because they want another golden mask. But because somewhere in the fragments may be the identity of a ruler who has been missing from history for thousands of years. A ruler whose people once believed would live forever. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The ancient Egyptians spent enormous effort defeating death. They preserved bodies. They carved names. They built tombs. They wrote spells. They created monuments designed to last for eternity. Yet one of their kings still managed to disappear. Not completely, because his tomb survived. His architecture survived. His religious symbols survived. And now, archaeologists are uncovering them, piece by piece, clue by clue. The king may have lost his name, but he did not lose everything. The desert protected the evidence. The tomb protected the memory. And modern archaeology has begun to bring that memory back. Somewhere beneath the ancient landscape of Egypt, the final clue may still be waiting. A hidden inscription, a forgotten mummy, a sealed chamber, a fragment of a coffin, one surviving cartouche. One word could be enough. One name could change everything. Because after thousands of years, the forgotten pharaoh may finally be ready to return. Not as a ruler, not as a god, but as a human being whose story was almost erased. And perhaps the next discovery will be the one that finally tells us who he was. There is a moment every archaeologist dreams about. After years of excavation, after removing layers of sand and debris, after studying broken pottery and fragments of ancient plaster, a hidden mark appears on the stone. At first, it may look meaningless. A damaged symbol, a faded line, a tiny fragment of hieroglyphs. But then someone recognizes it. A royal sign, a title, perhaps even part of a name. And suddenly thousands of years of silence begin to collapse. For the forgotten pharaoh buried at Abydos, that moment could be the difference between remaining anonymous and returning to history. Because the tomb has already given archaeologists something extraordinary. It has revealed that a powerful ruler was buried here. The architecture suggests royal status. The religious imagery connects the burial to the sacred traditions of ancient Egypt. The scale of the tomb suggests enormous resources. But the identity remains hidden. And that missing identity is not just an archaeological inconvenience. It is the final piece of the puzzle. To understand why, we have to look at what a royal name meant to the Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians had a word for a person's name: Ren. It was more than a label. The Ren was considered part of a person's existence. As long as the name was spoken and remembered, the person could continue to exist in some form. This belief explains the obsession with inscriptions. A king's name could be carved into a temple, painted inside a tomb, written on a coffin, stamped onto pottery, engraved on jewelry, placed on statues. Every appearance strengthened the ruler's presence. The king was creating a form of immortality through repetition. And this is why erasing a name could be so powerful. If someone destroyed the name, they were not simply removing information. They were attacking memory. They were attempting to weaken the person's existence. This makes the possibility of a deliberately erased pharaoh incredibly disturbing. Perhaps the missing name is not the result of time. Perhaps someone wanted the ruler to vanish. And if that is true, the damage surrounding the tomb could tell us something about an ancient political conflict. But first, archaeologists have to determine whether the damage is actually deliberate. This is not always easy. Ancient tombs experienced thousands of years of environmental damage. Floodwater could destroy plaster. Humidity could weaken paint. Rockfalls could crush inscriptions. Earthquakes could crack walls. Later visitors could carve their own marks. Robbers could break objects while searching for valuables. And centuries of exposure can turn once perfect hieroglyphs into barely recognizable traces. So archaeologists must separate natural destruction from intentional destruction. That requires patience. They compare damaged surfaces. They examine tool marks. They look at the direction of breaks. They compare missing sections with surviving examples. Sometimes the pattern becomes obvious. If a face has been smashed while the rest of the scene remains intact, that may suggest deliberate damage. If a royal name has been carefully chiseled away while nearby text survives, the evidence becomes even stronger. And if the same ruler's name is attacked across multiple monuments, the pattern can become impossible to ignore. Egypt has experienced this before. Hatshepsut's monuments provide one of the most famous examples. She ruled Egypt for years. She built monuments that celebrated her power. She presented herself as a legitimate king. Yet after her death, many representations of her were damaged or removed. Her name disappeared from some official contexts. Her statues were destroyed. Her legacy was partially buried. But whoever attempted to erase her made a critical mistake. They could destroy individual monuments. They could damage individual inscriptions, but they could not destroy everything. Her temple remained. Fragments survived. And eventually, archaeologists reconstructed her story. This is an important lesson for the unknown king at Abydos. Erasing a ruler is difficult, The ancient world was too large. A royal king could have left evidence in many places. His officials could have mentioned him. His craftsmen could have reused his materials. His family could have carried his memory. His tomb could have survived. Even if the official record was manipulated, physical evidence can remain. That means the search for this pharaoh cannot be limited to one chamber. Researchers must investigate the entire archaeological landscape. Abydos is particularly valuable because it contains layers from different periods. The same sacred landscape was used repeatedly. Burials were constructed. Temples were rebuilt. Old structures were expanded. New rulers established their own monuments. Later civilizations reused the area. This creates a complicated archaeological record. But it also means there may be connections hidden everywhere. A piece of stone from one period may have been reused centuries later. A broken statue may have been moved. A burial object may have been placed in a secondary tomb. A royal inscription may have survived only because someone incorporated it into another structure. In archaeology, destruction can sometimes create preservation. The object disappears from its original context, but survives somewhere else. And that is why museums can be treasure houses of forgotten history. Not treasure in the traditional sense. Information. Across museums around the world are fragments discovered during excavations more than a century ago. Some were catalogued. Some were assigned uncertain identities. Some were simply labeled unknown. At the time, researchers did not have the technology or comparative evidence available today. A fragment that seemed insignificant could become important decades later. A piece of linen with a faded inscription could connect two unrelated collections. A coffin fragment could match the artistic style of a particular dynasty. A small statue could contain a royal title. And suddenly, the anonymous object becomes a historical fingerprint. This possibility is particularly important when studying royal mummies. Many Egyptian mummies have complicated histories. Some were moved from their original tombs. Some were placed in hidden caches. Some were damaged by ancient thieves. Some were incorrectly identified by early archaeologists. And some remain uncertain. Modern science is gradually reopening these cases. CT scanning can examine the body without unwrapping it. Dental evidence can reveal age and family connections. Bone analysis can show physical stress. DNA can reveal genetic relationships. Chemical analysis can sometimes reveal geographic origins. Together, these methods can transform an unknown mummy into a historical individual. Imagine discovering that a mummy currently labeled simply as an unknown royal actually belonged to the ruler buried at Abydos. That would be extraordinary. The tomb would suddenly have a person. The mummy would suddenly have a home. And the history of that period would gain another royal figure. But there is an even more important possibility. What if the mummy reveals how the king died? That could answer questions the tomb itself cannot. If the bones show severe trauma, perhaps the ruler died in battle. If there is evidence of disease, his death may have been natural. If he died unusually young, political succession may have followed quickly. If he suffered repeated injuries, his life may have involved military activity. These clues could completely change our understanding of his reign. Consider Senebkay. His remains showed multiple serious injuries. The pattern suggested violence and possibly combat. That discovery transformed him from a name on a list into a person who may have died fighting. Suddenly, the political instability of his period became more tangible. The body was telling the story. The same could happen again. The unknown king's skeleton may contain a message, a fracture, a wound, a healed injury, a disease. Even the condition of the teeth could reveal his lifestyle. Ancient bones are silent, but they are not completely mute. They preserve evidence, and evidence can be interpreted. There is another clue that may prove important: the religious imagery surrounding the tomb. At Abydos, The presence of protective deities such as Isis and Nephthys would have carried deep meaning. These figures were associated with mourning, protection, resurrection, and the preservation of the dead. Their presence tells us that the burial followed established religious traditions. It also helps connect the tomb to a broader network of Egyptian beliefs. The deceased king was not simply being hidden underground. He was being prepared for transformation. The tomb was part of a ritual process. The burial chamber represented more than a room. It was a threshold, a place between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The ancient Egyptians believed the deceased needed guidance through the afterlife. This is why religious texts were so important. Spells and sacred passages were placed in tombs to help the dead navigate dangers beyond the physical world. The Book of the Dead, the Book of Amduat, and other funerary traditions served this purpose in different periods. The words were not merely decoration, they were instructions, protection, a map for eternity. So if the mysterious tomb contains fragments of such texts, they could provide additional evidence about when it was built and which religious traditions were dominant at the time. And every new clue narrows the possibilities. Architecture, religion, art, pottery, burial style, chronology, human remains. Together, these clues can become more powerful than any single inscription. This is how a forgotten king can slowly emerge from the darkness. Not through one dramatic discovery, through accumulation, one fragment, then another, until the evidence becomes too strong to ignore. And perhaps this is exactly what is happening now. The tomb may have been silent for thousands of years, but it has not been empty of information. Every wall carries a clue. Every damaged surface carries a story. Every fragment may have a connection. The question is whether archaeologists can assemble them before time destroys what remains. Because the desert is both protector and destroyer. It can preserve ancient objects for millennia, but it can also slowly erase them. Sand moves, water enters, stone weakens, paint fades, and once an inscription disappears completely, there may be no way to recover it. That makes the current investigation a race against time. The longer the evidence remains exposed, the more vulnerable it becomes. But if researchers can document it, analyze it, and connect it with other discoveries, the forgotten pharaoh may finally be identified. And when that happens, something remarkable will occur. A man who once ruled a kingdom, whose name vanished into the darkness, will suddenly become visible again. His tomb will no longer be anonymous. His dynasty will no longer be missing a piece. His story will return to the historical record. Perhaps the most powerful discovery will not be gold. It will not be a statue. It will not even be the mummy. It will be a few ancient symbols carved into stone. A royal name. A name that survived thousands of years of silence. A name that someone may once have tried to destroy. And if archaeologists can recover it, the forgotten pharaoh will have achieved exactly what the ancient Egyptians wanted more than anything. He will be remembered. For thousands of years, the desert kept a secret. Beneath layers of rock, sand, and forgotten history, a royal tomb waited in silence. The people who built it are gone. The priests who performed its rituals are gone. The dynasty that gave its ruler power is gone. Even the civilization that created the tomb eventually changed beyond recognition. But the tomb remained. And now, archaeologists are standing where ancient priests once stood, trying to answer a question that has survived longer than any human memory could have. Who was the ruler buried here? At first, it might sound like a simple archaeological mystery. Find the tomb, find the mummy, read the name, problem solved. But ancient Egypt rarely gives up its secrets so easily. The tomb may have been robbed. The mummy may have been moved. The inscriptions may have been damaged. The burial equipment may have been scattered. And the name that should have connected everything together may have disappeared. Yet the deeper we look, the more remarkable the discovery becomes. Because even without a complete name, the tomb has already revealed something important. This was someone who mattered. Someone powerful enough to command the resources necessary to construct a royal burial. Someone important enough to receive sacred protection. Someone whose final resting place was connected to one of Egypt's most significant religious landscapes. And perhaps most importantly, someone whose memory did not completely disappear. The architecture survived. The symbols survived. Fragments survived. The story survived. Only the identity is missing. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The ancient Egyptians believed that the name was essential for eternal existence. They built monuments specifically to preserve it. They repeated royal names across temples and tombs. They carved them into stone. They surrounded them with protective symbols. They believed that as long as a person's name continued to be spoken, that person could continue to exist. And yet here we are, thousands of years later, standing before a royal tomb where the name is uncertain. It is almost as if someone succeeded in doing what the Egyptians feared most, erasing a person from memory. But not completely, because the tomb itself became a kind of time capsule. It preserved evidence that the ruler existed. It preserved the religious beliefs of his world. It preserved the architectural traditions of his period. And perhaps it preserved clues about the political struggles surrounding his reign. This is why the discovery matters even before the final identification. Archaeology does not always need a famous name to change history. Sometimes the unknown tells us more than the known. A nameless king can reveal how royal burial traditions developed. An empty chamber can reveal how ancient priests responded to flooding or tomb robbery. A damaged inscription can reveal political conflict. A forgotten burial can reveal how unstable a dynasty really was. And a mummy can reveal the human cost of living in that world. The people of ancient Egypt were not statues. They were human beings. They became sick. They suffered injuries. They grew old. They fought wars. They loved their families. They feared death. And they spent enormous effort preparing for what they believed came after it. That is what makes the study of Egyptian mummies so powerful. When scientists examine the remains of Tutankhamun, Ramses II, Hatshepsut, and other ancient Egyptians, they are not simply studying objects. They are studying people. Tutankhamun was once a young man facing the responsibilities of kingship. Ramses II was once an elderly ruler whose body carried the evidence of a long life. Hatshepsut was once a woman who entered a political world dominated by male kings and somehow became one of Egypt's most successful rulers. Their stories survived because their names survived. But there were many others whose names did not. That is why the mysterious pharaoh of this tomb matters. He represents all the rulers whose stories were almost lost. Perhaps he ruled for decades. Perhaps he ruled for only a few years. Perhaps he died in battle. Perhaps he died naturally. Perhaps his successor respected him. Perhaps his successor hated him. We do not know yet. But the possibility that the ruler's identity was deliberately erased is what makes this mystery so compelling. Ancient Egypt was a world where political power and memory were deeply connected. A king could build monuments to prove his legitimacy. A successor could modify those monuments. A rival could destroy his name. A priest could move his body. A later generation could forget him. History was constantly being rewritten. And sometimes, the evidence of that rewriting is still visible. A damaged cartouche, a broken face, a statue with its identity removed, a monument reused by another ruler. These are archaeological scars. They tell us that the past was not peaceful. It was contested. People fought not only for territory and wealth, but for memory. And perhaps the forgotten ruler beneath Abydos became one of the victims of that struggle. But there is another possibility. Maybe nobody deliberately erased him. Maybe he simply disappeared because history is selective. Thousands of people lived during every Egyptian dynasty. Only a small number became famous. Even among kings, some names were repeated for centuries while others faded away. A ruler could build monuments that were later destroyed. His descendants could die. His dynasty could collapse. His tomb could be forgotten. Eventually, even the people who knew his name would be gone. And once the last person stopped speaking it, the name began its journey into silence. That may be what happened here. Not a conspiracy, not a deliberate assassination of memory. Just time. Thousands of years of it. But whether the ruler was intentionally erased or simply forgotten, modern archaeology now has the opportunity to reverse that process. New excavations can reveal hidden chambers. Advanced imaging can expose details invisible to the naked eye. DNA can connect unknown remains to known royal families. Chemical analysis can identify materials. Digital reconstruction can restore damaged spaces. And inscriptions can sometimes be recovered from fragments that earlier generations considered useless. The next major clue could be incredibly small. A single piece of pottery, a fragment of linen, a damaged coffin, a forgotten object in a museum, a few surviving hieroglyphs, one royal title, one name. That is all it might take. Because once the identity is established, everything else can be reconsidered. The tomb can be compared with the ruler's known monuments. His possible family can be investigated. His reign can be placed into the political timeline. His burial practices can be understood. His relationship with other kings can be reconstructed. And perhaps the mystery of his disappearance can finally be explained. That is why archaeology is so much more than digging. It is reconstruction. It is the process of taking fragments and turning them into history. The archaeologist does not simply uncover an object. They ask where it came from, who made it, why it was placed there, who used it, who moved it, why it was abandoned, and what it can tell us about the people who left it behind. The forgotten pharaoh's tomb is therefore not the end of a mystery. It is the beginning. The discovery has opened a door into a period that still contains enormous gaps. And behind that door may be a story about power, war, religion, succession, betrayal, or political transformation. Perhaps the ruler was a powerful king who briefly united a divided Egypt. Perhaps he was a regional ruler whose dynasty was eventually defeated. Perhaps he was a forgotten ancestor of a later royal family. Perhaps he died violently and was buried with honors despite the circumstances. Or perhaps the tomb belongs to a ruler we have not even considered yet. That is the beauty of an unsolved archaeological mystery. The evidence does not care what we expect. It can overturn the story. It can force historians to rewrite timelines. It can turn a forgotten name into a major historical figure. And sometimes, it can prove that the ancient world was far more complicated than the surviving records suggest. For now, the tomb remains a question mark. The walls have survived. The sacred symbols have survived. The burial architecture has survived. Fragments of the ancient world have survived. And somewhere, perhaps, the final clue is still waiting. Maybe it lies beneath another layer of earth. Maybe it is hidden behind a blocked doorway. Maybe it rests inside a museum collection. Maybe it is written on the wrappings of an unidentified mummy. Or maybe it is sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone to recognize what it means. After thousands of years, the forgotten king may be closer to us than we realize. And if his name is eventually recovered, the discovery will be more than another archaeological headline. It will be a restoration. A man who was once powerful enough to command an ancient kingdom will finally have his identity returned. A tomb that has been silent for millennia will finally have a voice. And a chapter of Egyptian history that disappeared into darkness will be written again. That is the strange power of archaeology. It cannot bring the dead back to life, but it can bring their stories back. It can give context to their bones, meaning to their monuments, and names to the forgotten. Perhaps that is what this mysterious pharaoh wanted all along. Not gold, not glory, not another monument, just to be remembered. Thousands of years ago, someone built this tomb believing that death was not the end. They believed the body could survive. They believed the spirit could continue. They believed the name could live forever. And now, after all this time, archaeologists are standing at the threshold of that belief. The king may have vanished. His kingdom may have vanished. His world may have vanished. But his tomb remained. And because it remained, his story was never completely lost. The desert kept his secret. The stones protected his memory. And now, the search continues. Because somewhere beneath the ancient sands of Egypt, one final piece may still be waiting. One inscription, one mummy, one hidden chamber, one name. And when that name finally comes to light, a ruler who disappeared from history thousands of years ago may finally return to it. Not as a legend, not as a mystery,